Okay, hello everyone. This is another tutorial video, now corresponding June-July, that as usual intends to give you some more ideas regarding what we can do in our classes. It's been almost 4 months teaching online, teaching remotely, and we are all certainly learning a lot during these successful months of implementation. In this, special month, we are also celebrating your dedication, your commitment, and your always willingness to learn. And this love you transmit in your classes to your students. So let's see what we have for this training. We will go over lesson aims. We're going to review what we presented and went over last year. Lesson aims according to the level, task type, and language systems. We will also review how to identify aims in lessons A and B particularly. We will check the importance of task aims. As usual, we'll get practical ideas to give task closure. And we have some ideas on how to use ebooks in our classes. Let's see. Oh. All right. So, a reminder about lesson aims. Do you recognize these objectives? Which courses do they belong to? Let me give you a few seconds for you to remember. Which books do they belong to? Which level? Okay, I'm sure you do remember. Maybe you've taught both of these courses. The first one are the can-do objectives from the Empower A2 Basic 7. And the second correspond to the Empower B1. Intermediate 1 actually is the course. Okay. So, why did I show you these can-do objectives to begin? Because there are some things to consider when focusing on aims. Every Empower unit presents a series of aims, a series of objectives. But you have noticed, those teachers who have had a chance to teach maybe all of the books or most of them, you have noticed that sometimes Empower repeats the same objectives, but in different courses, in different levels. So sometimes one objective, which is first introduced in A1, is later presented in A2. So it's very important when dealing with objectives and aims to consider the level, the task, the kind of task, and the language systems that are presented in each lesson. So, for example, getting back to the objectives we showed before. The first can-do objectives, I want you to pay attention to the second one. It says, talk about your family, right? But if you notice, in the second list of can-do objectives, you have a very similar one. Let's see first, which book and which level does the first objective belong to? The language aims in the Empower series have been arranged according to the CEFOR descriptors. We all know that. This set, for instance, belongs to the Empower A1 Basic 1. Okay, so we have seen this when teaching Basic 1. We are all familiar with that. And they ask learners to talk about their families. Now, the same objective or a similar objective is also presented in this list. To talk about your family and your family history. Now, what is the difference? Now here, in this course, which is Basic 8, and it's the Empower A2, learners will talk about their families again. However, the level of competence expected has to be different. And we have to expect definitely more from those students complying with a similar objective because of the level. So here, students will be able to give more details about their families and connect their ideas more effectively. So here, students will be also able to use some transitions, some connectors, some cohesive devices, right, that they didn't use before. So, for instance, if in a Basic 1, we have to assess students in the objective of talk about your family, what we do expect from them, from our students, is to say, okay, I have one brother, I have one sister, my mother's name is Rosa, my father's name is Pedro, my mother is 50 years old, and my father is 60 years old. Okay, with that, definitely a student will get a 4. A Basic 1 student will get a 4. With some pronunciation issues because of the level. However, in a Basic 8 with the same objective, students are expected to produce more. Here, they include history. So here, students will or should be able to say, okay, I live with my parents and I have 2 siblings. My parents are not from Lima. They were born in Arequipa. My big brother is 40 years old. He got married last year and he had a baby, for example. Okay, so you notice that lesson names are connected to the competency level of the students. And this has to do a lot with this Bloom's taxonomy we have also previously seen and studied. Do you remember these so mentioned hot skills? So these higher order thinking skills have to be very kept in mind when designing our lessons, when choosing our lesson aim for assessing our students. So it is like, what do I expect my student to be able to do at this level, considering once more the Common European Framework. So again, in Power A1, Basic 1, the task would be very simple. As you can see there, tell your partner about your family. Use the verbs in the box. Have, go, study, live, and work. No? But don't make notes. Okay, so my brother has 2 children, a boy and a girl. Say what you remember about your partner's family. So here, as you can notice, there is a keyword, which is remember. Remember is at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. It's what an A1 student can do. An A1 student can remember and can understand. However, an A2 student is a bit higher in the pyramid, and the task proposed is different. Here it says, Make notes about the people in your family, and they have some questions there. When were they born? Where do they live? How old are they? What do they do? Okay. Ask and answer questions about your family trees. So here they have to ask questions, right? They have to produce, right? This is something that probably at lower levels they cannot do because they have to create questions in order to ask their peers. And then they have to report. And probably to report, they have to analyze their partner's responses. And they have to apply some previous knowledge. So the level of difficulty in this task I propose my students has to be well thought according to the level my students are. So then, considering Bloom's taxonomy, we should be aware of the type of task the book proposes. Again, for example, in Empower A1, learners are expected to talk about their own families to each other and then report what they remember from their peers. In contrast, in Empower A2, learners are expected to also elaborate questions and give additional information about their own families. Okay, so I know my lesson aim, I know in which level my student is, I know the competency they need to have, and I know the type of task I have to design according to the level. Okay, so now, what else is necessary? It is also important to consider the language systems involved in each lesson. This is an example that we can find regarding modals for expressing ability. You will notice, and you will probably have already realized, that Empower series sometimes repeats some language systems, some grammar, some vocabulary. For example, modals for expressing abilities. In Empower A1, they teach students to express abilities using can. And that's enough. And that's a basic 5, right? If students are able to say, I can dance, I can swim, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But in Empower A2, not only do they have to use can, they also have to use could and couldn't. So they are going to talk about abilities, but also abilities in the past. And what about in Empower B1 Plus? In Empower B1 Plus, they, in addition, learn some more modals and more phrases of ability. Okay, so what does this mean? That if I'm teaching an Empower A2 and my student says, okay, I can dance, my sister can cook, my father can drive a car, can we give this student a 4 or a 3? Probably not, because the system involved in the aim require this student to also use could and couldn't, no matter how much additional information the student can give me if the student is not using the language expected. The same happens in Empower B1 Plus, and this assessment gets more complex as, the higher the level is. So why? Because here, for example, in Empower B1 Plus, we have students at upper intermediate levels who are very fluent and will be able to carry out a conversation in which they have to talk about abilities. And probably here they will use can, they will use could, but the book also wanted them to use manage to, right? I managed to do this, or I am able to do this. So that's what I need to challenge my students to do. I cannot give my student a 4 or a 3, which means 3 meaning very good, if they are not actually using the systems that are expected at that particular level, which are very related definitely to the lesson name. Okay, so it is our job as teachers to guide the students and to challenge them to produce the right level with the appropriate language tools. So, of course, the input we will give our students has to be directed towards that. But when we propose the task, it is very important that we delimit and make it clear for my students what we expect from them at that particular level. Okay, so now I wanted to show you a little quote which has nothing to do with teaching, but we can actually apply to language teaching. The quote says, "It is not the ship so much as the skillful sailing that assures the prosperous voyage," or voyage as in French. So, how does this quote apply to language teaching? Let's reflect a bit on that. Take a couple of seconds. Have you already found it out? It means that we as teachers are the skilled sailors, right? We are the ones who are sailing the ship in which our students have just boarded. So we are the sailors who will take our students into a prosperous voyage in language learning, in this case, in learning English. So we can have a lot of tools. The ship can be represented, in books, our platform, our system, our methodology. But you as a skillful sailors will be the ones who will make this possible. So let's have a little review on identifying lesson aims. And in this session, we're going to focus on lessons A and B. Okay, later we'll come back to lessons C and D, which have a totally different structure. So, however, lessons A and B are the core of the unit because they introduce the language that my students have to master by the end of that unit. This is a lesson A, unit 5, and Empower A2. And the main aim was to learn to talk about towns. The systems involved in grammar, there is, there are, and in vocabulary, places in a city. Okay, so we as teachers must keep in mind that by the end of this lesson, the whole lesson, my students, my learners will be better able to talk about towns, cities, using there is, there are, and vocabulary about places in the city. That's my lesson aim. Most lesson aims in lesson A and B do focus on a spoken function. There is a function which is to talk about, to describe, to compare, to contrast. There is a grammar structure. In this case, there is, there are, and there is a lexical set. In this case, places in a city. Most lessons in Empower series do that. That's important to remember. Don't forget 3 requirements to have a successful lesson name: function, grammar point, and lexical set. So then, let's check more examples of lesson names. Let's identify, right, some specific aims that we can come up with out of what is stated in the book. Okay, take a look at this. Start remembering which course, which book they belong to. Okay, let's take a look at the first. Empower B1, lesson 11A, intermediate 5. Don't worry, I don't have it by heart either. So what is my specific lesson name? Remember, we should all have, lesson name clearly stated, taken from what is presented in the book. And it should be stated in this way. By the end of the lesson, learners will be better able to, what is my function? In this case, explain what technology does using defining clauses, that is my grammar, and compound nouns, that is my lexical set. Okay, remember the 3 important features of aims. So what is the language I expect my students to produce? Okay, well, billboards are large signs that show adverts on main roads. They can be quite distracting. Empower B1, intermediate 5. Let's take a look at the next, Empower B1 plus. The higher the level, the more complex my aim becomes. This is exactly lesson 4A, intermediate 7. And here, my specific lesson aim is, by the end of the lesson, learners will be better able to describe people and abilities using modals, phrases of abilities, and verbs of ability. Here, my function, to describe. My grammar, modals, phrases of abilities. And my lexical set, verbs of ability. And the example I'm expecting my students to produce, my language sample, I expect my students to produce is, I managed to learn to drive after 2 days of practice. It wasn't that hard, to be honest, and I could pass my driving test in the first attempt. I'm so lucky. Do you notice the level of elaboration and the function, which is to describe, and the grammar and lexical set present in the sample language I need to expect my student to produce. Empower B2, upper intermediate, first month of advanced courses. So this is exactly lesson 3B, and it's an intermediate 12 actually. So my aim, by the end of the lesson, learners will be better able to discuss sports activities and issues using present perfect simple and continuous and words connected with sport. Again, the 3 features of aims. The function, to discuss. Grammar, present perfect, simple and continuous. Lexical set, words connected with sports. And look at the language sample expected. I've been playing football since I was 5 years old, so it is no surprise that I decided to play it for a living. And I can say this has been the best decision I've ever made. No regrets about it. So notice, guys, how the length and complexity of learners' production increases as the level does. This is a mandatory requirement for students so that we can guarantee that they have accomplished the minimum command of expected language for that level. And this is the reason why they should be promoted to the next level. So we cannot expect less from students, otherwise they will not overcome the plateau, this so-called intermediate plateau, in which some English students stay and remain. Why? Because we might be missing some important parts of the objective. We might be maybe testing, assessing the grammar expected, but not the lexical set. Or maybe we do not delimit the function correctly, appropriately, or we do not delimit clearly the length of language my student has to produce. This is something crucial and necessary when I propose my task to students that later will be assessed. So, the lesson aims that we have seen are the ones we ought to achieve by the end of the whole lesson. Yes? Okay, this is clear. Every lesson, A and B, they both have an aim. Okay. However, hardly ever do we get to teach the whole lesson in the same session. This can happen maybe in fast-track courses because they have 3 hours, or in these interdaily courses. But in regular classes, this does not happen because in an hour and a half, in just 90 minutes, it's impossible to reach that. So what happens? Many times we cover a whole lesson in Empower in about 2 days, depending on the book, sometimes even in 3. So what do we need to do? We might need to split the lesson in 2 parts. Now, how do we do that? By delimiting clearly how we can split the lesson so that I can have a first aim that probably includes only the lexical items, and another one that includes both lexical items plus the grammar. Okay? And I need to know that from the beginning of my lesson planning, because I need to know in which moment I will stop my lesson. So later I don't run out of time and I do not end the lesson with a clear aim. So it's very important to know how tasks can have aims, how you can propose a task after a listening section, after a reading section, or after a grammar section. Giving a closure to a class, to every single class, is a must. We cannot end a lesson without an appropriate closure. We cannot leave lessons not concluded, because the student needs to feel some sense of achievement by the end of the lesson. They need to know that they learned, achieved something before they go home. Okay? That's what we need to check carefully here. Okay, let's go back to the same lesson, 5A. Remember, the objective was to describe towns, right? Using there is, there are, and vocabulary about places in the cities. Okay, so ideally we start here with the reading, and ideally we finish here with the speaking. But that's not gonna happen. So sometimes what happens, we start here with the reading, we do the reading, and we finish after the vocabulary, because 90 minutes will probably, take me till that point. So what can I do? I say, if my objective was, my lesson objective was to describe towns using there is, there are, and vocabulary about places in the city, here I cannot assess that yet, or I cannot have my students produce language using there is, there are, there yet, because I haven't introduced that. Okay, or what happens if, okay, I get to do the grammar, okay. But this grammar section had some mechanical exercises, some tables to complete, but did not have any production task, or it was minimum. So this clearly explains why it is important that we be ready to give a class some closure at the end of each task whenever it is needed. Because we can have a wonderful plan. We can plan to do many activities. However, when we start the lesson, especially in these new environments, digital environments, we can notice that, okay, some connection issues for my students or some technology, delays will make my 90 minutes even shorter. We notice that nowadays, even lessons last a bit less. So something that we have been perceiving in some observations is precisely that sometimes, because of time constraints, basically, many teachers end lessons abruptly without some sort of wrap-up, and with a feeling that content is incomplete. And with the feeling of learners unsure about what they have learned. So now we have noticed how necessary it is for teachers to be able to give lessons some closure in order to formalize, because that's the purpose of closures, to formalize what has been taught and make lessons more meaningful, coherent, and cohesive. So it is like my lesson is like a plan that has a good beginning, a good sequence, and a good closure. It's like an essay. A good essay without a closure or a conclusion is not effective, right? And it's not meaningful for the students. So then the concept of task aims at the end of every task, is very important to highlight and to apply. Task aims. Let's take a look at the lesson aim once more. This time is Unit 9A. It said learn to say where you are and what you are doing, grammar, present continuous, vocabulary, shopping, money, and prices. Okay, my lesson aim then is said, okay, by the end of this lesson, learners will be better able to say where they are and what they are doing using present continuous, and vocabulary about shopping, money, and prices. I'm shopping for some clothes because my son needs a new pair of jeans. That could be maybe the language expected here, right? Okay, how about task aims? Let's take a look at some tasks. Okay, so let's see. What if I started, because that's lesson A, what if I started my getting started section that took me a little while, and then I started lesson A and I only had time to do vocabulary. That's it. I just had the time to do vocabulary A, B, C, D, E. Okay. First, it's important to identify the whole activity. This activity starts with two matching tasks, right? First, they say match pictures 1 to 6 with the words in the box. Okay. Then it says, okay, now look at the plan of the shopping mall and match the words with the words A to F in the plan. Okay. Then there is some pronunciation practice where the learners focus on stress on compound nouns. Okay, I practice this vocabulary, but pronunciation this time. And then there is some activation task here where learners must say where people can do these activities. This way, they will practice the vocabulary from the previous task. It's basically like to activate, apply the vocabulary presented. Okay, but this is not a production task itself. Okay. And then there is a vocabulary focus, which is at the back of the book. Basically talking about money, prices, expressions. Well, they just learn how to give prices. So imagine, okay, I get to exercise E. Maybe I assign vocabulary focus for homework, and my class goes from 5:35 to 7:05. And I notice that it's 10 to 7 or a quarter to 7, and I just have 15 minutes or 20 minutes to finish my class. And I see, and the next activity is long because it's a listening. And I know that in 15 or 20 minutes, I won't be able to complete that, because if I do so, the lesson will be incomplete. And remember, that's not what I have to do. I need to give my lesson a closure. So it's advisable not to begin a long activity if I know I lack time and I will not be able to complete it. Because again, the idea is to finish with some production from my student. Production in this case will be focused on one part of the aim, because one part of the aim is to deal with the lexis, to talk about shopping. No, anyway, I mean, the students have to talk about shopping using vocabulary about shops, using vocabulary about money and prices. So there is a lot of language input that my students can actually use to produce. So here are some practical ideas to give this task closure, especially if class time is about to end. Okay, let me see. Here. Option 1. Learners play a guessing game or heads up. Remember, heads up? They should be able to describe places in the mall and what people do there. So I say, okay, let's talk about, okay, we have talked about places, no, for shopping. Okay, breakout rooms. Okay, one of you choose a place in your head. Okay, and describe the place, use adjectives, use activities people do there, and your partner has to guess. Perfect. Or the student shows, maybe with a card, and the name written, this to the camera, and the student has to describe it. Okay. Option 2. Learners discuss how fair some prices for some products are. This is now a little more complex, activating more hot skills. They're giving pictures and how to discuss in groups, right? So maybe you can prepare, as a teacher, you can prepare a list of common products you can find in supermarkets or in stores, and the prices for them, no? You can choose some high prices, some low prices, okay? just real prices. And the students discuss. For example, they say, okay, how much is that dress? This is a Zara dress, and it costs 300 soles. And then you ask, what do you think about the price? Oh, no, I think it's too expensive for a dress. And then the other person says, yes, but it's because of the brand, it's Zara, okay? So of course, with appropriate prompts, you can help your students to do this. This is definitely a more complex task. Option 3, learners show pictures of the shops they like and say how often they go there, what they buy, and how much they usually spend there on some products. Here, for example, it's another task that I love to do in classes, which are presentations. You know that you can give your students permission to share their screen. So you can give them some time to prepare their own presentations in PowerPoint. They quickly look for pictures of their favorite shops, maybe what they buy there, and they prepare a simple, short 1 or 2 minute presentation and using simple vocabulary. The vocabulary here about shopping, maybe prices, money, simple present, which is something they are recycling, because the idea also sometimes is to recycle language previously taught. So they can say, okay, my favorite shop is Saga. I go there once a month. Well, but nowadays I don't go. I buy online. I usually buy sneakers. My favorite sneakers are, I don't know, Nike. They cost about 200 soles. So with that language the student is producing, I am able to assess my lesson name, my session name, let's call it session name, not lesson name, but my session name. That particular session, I wanted my student to finish talking about the shops they like and say how often they go and what they buy using this vocabulary. That's okay. And my student, when my students are able to comply with this task, they feel achieved. They feel they have achieved something. Oh, I am going home feeling I have learned something today and I am able to do something today. That is what my purpose has to be. Now, what if my lesson ends after the listening? Let's say I spent a short time in my getting started. I had time for my vocabulary, but and I can cover all listening, but I don't have time for what comes next. I don't have time for grammar. So I just finished my listening. Okay. First, I need to analyze. The listening activity starts with a quick activation through a short discussion, which is when you meet friends in town, what do you usually do? Ideas, okay. The same, a group of friends want to go to the cinema. Where is a good place to meet? Okay. This is like a preparation for the listening task itself. Then it comes the listening activity. Okay, the first listening, this is the first, focuses on the main idea. It has like a prediction task. Then I have the second listening, this time focuses on details. And the third listening focuses on the end of the story. So before the listening task itself, there is a prediction activity. So it's very important that you do this analysis, guys, that you analyze the activities, because if you don't, you might not know whether you should leave the task incomplete or not. Sometimes, okay, sometimes I don't have time and I end in lesson C, but that will not make my next lesson memorable, because the 5 or the 6 activities are connected, so I cannot break them, you see? So, well, and here, how can we give this task a closure? Again, let's imagine it's exercise F, and I have 10 minutes or 15 minutes left before my class ends. I need to give my task a closure because in 10 or 15 minutes, I'm not going to do the following task, which is grammar. Definitely not a good idea, no? So I need to know how to wrap up this. Yes, there has to be a way to consolidate this listening effectively. Let's see ideas. Okay. Let me see, let me move myself. Okay, the aim of this task is to provide learners with a practical application of the vocabulary about shopping that they learned before. Yes. How can we give this closure? Option 1, learners make plans for the people in the listening, Simon, Susie, Amy, and Sandeep, about what to do after the movie. They can include other places in the mall they can visit, individually or in pairs. They just write down ideas for plans. That's all. They can recycle, simple present, or maybe they can go, they can go. Simple ideas. My objective is not to evaluate grammar here, only some lexis, okay, and listening consolidation. Option 2, learners write a narration of the events in this dialogue. This could be assigned individually and then have learners comparing groups. A good idea to wrap up listenings and readings, because both are receptive tasks, is to have students summarize. This is a very good idea because it also activates this hot skill, which is very important to start developing in our students, summarizing. Learners can continue the conversation after the recording, after the last one. And they can create a dialogue about buying popcorn and a snack, or maybe the seating arrangement during the movie. So that's another good idea with listenings and readings, to continue, to continue the conversation. With readings, another good idea is to role play, being some of the participants in the story. So there are lots of ideas of application tasks that can give your lesson, your session, a closure. And again, students, okay, go home feeling accomplished. Okay, today, yes, I started the lesson learning about shopping. I listened about shopping, and my teacher had me talking about plans, for doing in a shopping mall. Okay. Or I had a conversation about the people in the dialogue. So there is sense of achievement. This is very necessary. Okay. And finally, what about grammar? Grammar is the most complex, definitely, activity to present, because it takes a lot of time. Definitely a grammar presentation takes time, maybe half of class time. So it's very common that I have the time in a 90-minute lesson to just do something previous, maybe the listening and then the grammar, and that's it. And then I think, how can I wrap it up? Because I don't have time for the whole complete speaking production activity. Okay, what can I do? First of all, again, crucial is to analyze the activity. Okay, what are the parts of this grammar activity? First, in task A, learners notice salient language from the previous listening task. Remember, we have mentioned this before. Empower lessons have been designed in a way that grammar and vocabulary come out usually from the listening or the reading text they have. So usually the salient language from those tasks are presented in the grammar section. Task B here, usually they focus on the target form, no? A simple exercise to raise awareness of that. This is a mechanical task that aims at consolidating the target form. Then there is a section for pronunciation, usually. In this case, word stress. There is usually grammar focus with mechanical exercises that we usually have to assign, no, for homework later, no, later on. Okay. And there is an application task. For example, here it says work on your own. Think of 3 places in your town or city, but don't tell your partner. Write a sentence to say what you're doing in each place, right? Okay, listen to your partner's sentence, guess where she is. This is an application task. Yes, it focuses on the form and meaning at the same time. Perfect. But what happens? It's a bit short. It's, I mean, not complex. It's kind of semi-controlled. So my intention, my plan doesn't have to be just to end here. I need to find a way to at least devote 10 or 15 minutes more for another task that gives a closure to the lesson, a bit more challenging. Since the aim of this task is to provide the students with the 3 dimensions of present continuous, because this clearly presents the form of present continuous, the meaning of present continuous, and the use of present continuous. And before, there was some vocabulary about shopping, maybe one day before or the same session. So there is a lot of input the students have received. Definitely, I need to give this task closure, okay? Not with the speaking task that the book proposes, not yet, maybe that can be left for the following class, but with one that I create, with one that I propose. Let me see. Option 1. Learners work on the photocopiable activities in the Empower Resource Pack. You know, the Empower Resource Pack have great ideas. We just need to choose which ones really activate language from students. Which is, for example, this one particularly, if you have your book on hand, you can check. And this is about guessing what they are watching or listening to or reading. You can use it. It's very fun. It doesn't take so much time, and have students use present continuous. Another option, this is more complex. This is to have learners prepare a dialogue. They imagine they run into an old friend and start talking about the circumstances in which they meet. They are expected to give details using present continuous. Hey, hello, hi, good to see you, long time no see you. Hey, what are you doing here? Here I am I don't know, I'm just waiting in line because I need to pay some bills in the bank. And you? Well, I'm actually shopping for some food today. Okay, something like that, a short dialogue. Option 3. In groups, a learner describes what a mysterious character is doing at the moment. Her classmates guess who the character is. They are expected to use present continuous. It can be someone famous, someone they imagine, okay? For example, they can say, okay, this person is now in her house in Florida. She's probably relaxing by her pool, maybe she's exercising, or maybe she's recording a new song for her new album, okay, and maybe like that, no? So any kind of task, as you can see, that give the session a closure in an effective and quick way, because these tasks, as you notice, are different from the tasks proposed in the book. The speaking task, I mean, because those are usually more elaborated, they take more time. These tasks, all in the 3 activities we have presented, grammar, listening, and vocabulary, will not take you more than 15 minutes, and they don't need so much preparation. Still, they give the lesson a closure, they give the task a closure, they don't let students with the feeling of an incomplete lesson, and they give them a sense of achievement, which is, again, what I have been repeating a lot throughout this presentation. So, what is the purpose of all of this, and why are we reminding you of this now, again? To maximize the learning experience. As we can see, it is utterly important to give students a consolidation task whenever needed. Every session, we need to give students the opportunity to feel they have consolidated some listening tasks, some reading tasks, some vocabulary, some grammar. Ending the lesson in the middle of the task is not the ideal case. Okay, we know it might occasionally happen for extraordinary circumstances, but it's not what we should expect. So we need to control timing. Time management is important. So I need to be checking my watch and see how much time do I have left, okay? And then I see my lesson plan and I see, okay, no, if I do this, there's not gonna be enough time. No, so I'm not gonna do this. I leave this for tomorrow. Better I do this, but I can finish with this task. So the ability of sometimes coming up with tasks, with closure tasks from the moment, or when planning your lesson plan, preparing some closure task just in case I finish here. Our students, guys, deserve to know they have achieved something within the current lesson. So they need to know that they need to turn off their laptops and talk to their parents and say, oh, today, you know what I learned this and this and this, you know, I can say this and this and this. Not only will this make them happier, but also it will make our lessons more meaningful. And that's the key. You teachers, getting back to the previous quote, remember, it's not a ship, is the sailors, and you are good sailors. Of course, you have all the tools, all the skills, so you ought to know where you are going and how. A good sailor know the destination. A good sailor know where he or she is taking the ship. So, and you know how you are doing it. So you need to know then where, you need to know how to make pauses in the journey before the final stop. So you need to know, okay, I'm gonna make a stop here. I'm gonna leave this big activity for tomorrow. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to add a consolidation task to wrap up my lesson here. That's what a good sailor like you have to do. Okay? All right, guys. This was this academic presentation about. And as usual, to conclude this academic presentation, we have some announcements. I hope you have reached till this point to see and listen to these announcements, which are very important. Guys, these are the dates to update some information regarding studies or international certificates, okay? Yeah, time flies, and the new, the current evaluation period has some steps like this, for example. So you will be sent an email before, but remember the dates. From August 3rd to August 14th, you will have to open the email and the link in the email to update information in case you have new studies or certificates to update. Okay, also remember that we will be validating online your certificates of attendance to workshops or webinars. I know most of you have been attending lots of webinars regarding online teaching, which have been so helpful to you. Maybe you've taken some online courses as well, or maybe you have any document related to your studies or international exams you couldn't present in the last maybe period, so you can do it now. Dates go from August 17th to September 3rd. Valid certificates will be those issued until August 31st. Okay, so remember that. You can only, present those that you will take this month in July and August. Okay, all right, guys. This is the first part of, the academic presentation. I hope you have seen the whole video and maybe the ideas presented here will help you in your lessons. Okay? I'll see you soon. Take care.